All right, when you hear that music, you know it's time for VYZYGOTH'S Clubhouse, the almost quarterly show where we try to look at the light side of things. And today we have what I consider a pretty special show. It started with Herb Smith of the Uticans and I talking about doing something on the comics because we had done something with Mad and Cracked probably over a year ago. And we thought we'd like to do something with an extension of that with the same stable of artists, more or less, for the famous comic books Creepy and Eerie. Herb wasn't sure that we had enough stuff to go with, and I started thinking about, well, could we possibly get somebody else involved in this? And I'm not going to go through the whole thing about how this happened. All I can say is that I contacted someone I had not talked to for quite some time, and just in a kind of serendipitous manner, it all worked out. And with Herb with us, we also have Deborah del Prete, and the list of credits for Deborah is long and exhausting. Suffice to say that she has done very well for herself from the times when we were all together in Palisades Park, New Jersey. She's currently the principal and founder of Carnet Entertainment. Her producing credits are some films that I know that you've all heard of: The Wedding Planner, The Spirit, Green Street Hooligans, Buried Alive, Suburban Girl, and the creature feature, Living Hell, for the Sci-Fi Channel. Under her new label, she's produced the film Lifted, and she's an executive producer of Paramount's classics Mean Creek, The Open Road, and From Prada to Nada. And it goes on and on. She has been involved in TV. She's been involved in theater. What I think is also extremely important and often never spoken about, she kind of has given back to the community as well. She has been a multiple-term treasurer of the board of directors for the New York chapter of Women in Film. She's been an artistic advocate for the foundation of Los Angeles County High School for the Arts, and has served as an executive mentor for both the Producers Guild of America and Step Up Women's Network. She's currently a member of the board of directors for Word Theater in L.A. and is a member of the Talent Managers Association, for which she recently has directed the 2013 Heller Awards. I'm glad to have said that I knew her when, and she's with us today, and I'm sorry for that long-winded stuff, but it's your own fault, Deborah. Thanks for being with us.
You're more than welcome. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, Deborah, I'm going to go into, perhaps how this all happened, about seeing your credits roll up on the Spirit and saying to myself, that can't be. Oh, it has to be. And having that back, in the back of my mind for about a year or so. And so when Herb and I were talking about this kind of show, I thought it would be a natural. And I'm really happy that you came on. And Herb, I just want to introduce you to Deborah. You guys have some things in common. We'll talk about that later in the hour.
Hi, Herb.
Hi, Deborah. Nice to meet you. Hi.
Same here.
Now, I'll tell you what, I never really knew that you were somewhat of a comic book aficionado when you were growing up, let's say.
Right.
And that would be something I think that was considered unusual. Yeah. So let me just ask you, because I'm going to ask Herb right after also, how you got your start in this, and eventually it did lead to something professionally. So can you tell us why you got the bug for that? Because a lot of people who have children today don't really think too much about the printed word, because they're always obviously involved electronically. How did it all happen, Deborah?
Well, in those days, we didn't have computers. We had TVs, but we didn't have computers. And I was an early reader. I read very early. I was always very curious, and I started reading early. And comic books were sort of one of those things. You went to your corner grocery store. I could see them there as a little kid, and I was interested, and I wanted to start looking at them. And I imagine the first ones my mother probably bought for me, or my father. And then from there, I just became a fan. And then it started to become about going down to that local grocery store, candy store, every time something new came out, always looking for those racks they had, and, waited with bated breath. But what happened is very soon I became very, very enchanted with superhero comics. And, for me it was DC. I became just in love with DC Comics, and I was just absolutely, from the very beginning, it was something that I was kind of addicted to.
Did you have anybody among your girlfriends at that time? And let's face it, we all kind of were polarized. Did you have any kind of any girlfriends that decided that or that shared that with you, or were you pretty much on your own?
No. Yeah, I would say that was never something that was shared, basically. It was always my alone in my room kind of thing. And frankly, you know, look, as a young kid, I was a little bit of a tomboy. You know, I always wanted to do what the boys do. I had a friend who lived next door to me on my grandparents had a house at the Jersey Shore. And my best friend who lived next door was the exact same age as me, and it was a boy. And so, you know, we hung out together, and we climbed trees together, and I could do anything, and I was, you know, was going to be the tough girl. And so, you know, he was a boy, and he read comics, so we did that. But when it came to girls, no. And my girlfriends at the time, when I did stuff with them, it was much more girly stuff. I mean, you know, I've always had that bizarre mix of the two, because I definitely hung out with my girlfriends and, you know, played with dolls and made Barbie clothes. But I also had a duality. I as much wanted to be with my friend Sal and climb trees and carve guns out of wood and, you know, and read comic books with him and watch superheroes and Mighty Mouse. We watched Mighty Mouse on TV when we were little. But anything with the super theme was good for me. But it is true, though, that I did start as I got a little older and maybe into the, you know, 9, 10-year-old age. I was attracted to comic books that had female superheroes in it because I did want to relate, you know, as we all do.
I told you that my entree into comic books was basically because at like 5 or 6 I was sick. That's all I remember. It was that long ago, but at least I could read. And for whatever reason, whatever the comic books that were given to me, I kind of gravitated toward Batman. And there's something else I remember from when I last spoke to you. That when it came to the newspapers, I was a big Phantom fan. I don't know, you know, it was just something about them. I know they were mysterious, but they also seemed very human. And it seemed like I thought to myself that, you know, I could probably do that. And that meant a lot to me because if I thought, I mean, I couldn't be Superman, but I think I could be Batman and Phantom. And so for that was my entree. And then I got into Classics Illustrated, which is another whole story. But Herb also got,
Me too. I read Classics Illustrated.
You did too, okay.
Yeah, that was a big one too.
Yeah, I mean they were excellent, by the way. But I mean that's how it was, and I want to ask Herb also because Herb became a really pretty decent. I would even say a historian of comic books. And Herb, what was your entree into this? I mean, was it kind of like Justice League or Marvel or what?
It was Marvel, and the first memory I have of really getting into comic books was I was probably about maybe 11 years old or so, 10 or 11, and in the couple summers I went to a day camp, and the first year I was there, they would take us on little excursions, trips like that. But before, I think it was raining one day, and we stayed in the one of the owners that was also one of my teachers in his basement. Because it was raining one day and we didn't go anywhere for a while, and they had some comic books there, and one of them was a reprint called Marvel's Greatest Comics, which was a reprint of Fantastic Four, and the one I remember was they call it the Galactus or the Silver Surfer trilogy right now. It was fantastic. It was a reprint of Fantastic Fours, like 48 through 50, where they had the Silver Surfer and Galactus. So that's kind of like the first memory I have of really reading comic books. And then that's where it started, and then later on I started buying them, as like Deborah mentioned, when you go to the store and they'd have it on the rack. And also we had a lady who had they don't have them anymore, I don't think. They certainly don't have them in Utica. I mean, they haven't had them in years, but there was a lady, Helen, who had a newsstand on this on a street in downtown Utica called Bleecker Street, and she had a newsstand that she would open up in the morning, and I would get comic books there, and she looked, I guess the story about her was she was dressed in she looked kind of like a homeless lady, you know, looked like a very poor lady, had the gloves without the fingers in them and everything, but the word was, the story was that she was actually very rich. So I used to get comic books there, and then I remember one time, my mother and I took a trip to New York City to see one of our relatives, and in New York City, where the comics are printed, the comics are actually a month ahead of what we would get in Utica, and I thought that was a real big deal.
Yeah, sure. That was a big deal, right? You were like
yeah,
the cool
it was.
guy getting ahead.
Yeah. Yep, they were a month ahead. I couldn't believe it.
You know, you said about being sick and reading them. I think I did that a lot, too, because I was also, when I was little, from like about 5 to about 8 or something, I had like a lot of allergy issues as a kid, and I was sick in bed a lot. Right, so that might have been part of it. The thing with me is, though, that, and why I think I don't remember exactly when, I started really early. I was collecting at 6 and 7 years old already. I did read really early, and like by 5, 6, I wanted comics, and that's when I started.
Well, you know, for us, it was easy. For guys, it was easy because, obviously, like a lot of things, let's face it, what was out there in popular media played to males. That was not necessarily something that may have drawn you to it, but did you find your way through to, I guess, favoring perhaps those who gave you Wonder Woman and others?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Here's the thing. I somehow started early on with the superheroes and Superman. And I remember reading Superboy a lot, okay, because, you know, they were a little younger and with Smallville. And then I remember when Supergirl first came, his cousin, and, you know, and Justice League. I was a big fan of Justice League because Wonder Woman was a major character in Justice League. And, you know, it was Batman and it was Superman, and I liked kind of all of them. I mean, I also was a huge I was one of those people who consumed huge, and this has been true of my entire life, which is sort of how you get to do things like develop movies, because you consume huge amounts of, you know, reading material. And even then, I mean, I didn't want to have like one comic book. I wanted to have like 20 comic books, you know, so I just read massive amounts of them. But I definitely think, like DC's female characters kind of pulled me into it more and more, too. So, yeah.
Now, you mentioned something that I had never heard of when we were speaking a couple of days ago. And this just completely got by me, and perhaps because it was a little bit of a male chauvinism in there. But you spoke about some superheroes that were females that I had never heard before. Can you tell us about them?
Oh, well, you're talking about Legion of Superheroes. Legion of Superheroes is a comic book. It's a DC comic series. I've collected it for years. I have what they call a completist collection, which it means I've tried to get every one that was sort of ever made. And by everyone, I mean one of everyone that was ever made. But it started in Superboy Comics, and I think it was either very early 60s or very late 50s. And it was these 3 kids from the future who visited Superboy back in time, and they were from the 30th century. And they belonged to a club called the Legion of Superheroes, which in the 30th century was a club, but it was a sanctioned club by the interstellar governments, because in the supposition that in the 30th century Earth is in a confederation of planets, and there's a lot of, you know, interstellar travel and interplanetary travel, and these kids are all superheroes in one way or another from something specific from their planet, and they protect the universe, and they work together, and they had to go, they created a time machine, and they needed Superboy to come into the 30th century and help them with his powers, because he was still the most superhero of all time. And there were girls in it, and from the very first one, the top 3, the 3 kids who came from the future, there was a girl called Saturn Girl. It was Lightning Lad, Saturn Girl, and Cosmic Boy, and they are what are considered the founding members of the Legion of Superheroes. And then they took him back in time. And then what happened is that started as one story in Superboy, but it became a spin-off. And later on it became a backup story in his book, because in the old days they had, the comic books were quite long, and there was the A story and the B stories in them. There would be a story about Superboy, and like there would be a story about Batman, and then there would be a separate story maybe about Robin, or maybe about Green Arrow. Green Arrow used to be in the Batman comics as a backup story before he had his own book. And that's what happened with Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes. Then later they had their own series and their own books, and they've had many, many permutations over the years. And there were many, many female characters in it. You know, after the first 3, there were many other girls. There was a Triplicate Girl, and there was Shrinking Violet, who could become miniature. Triplicate Girl could split into 3 copies of herself, and a host of others that were all very equally powerful as the boys, but, you know, they all had their own special things. They just had cuter costumes.
Okay.
Which I like, too, by the way.
It's okay. Yeah.
I just still love to, have the different colored outfits, but that was part of it for me. Their outfits were very cool. They kind of were like skater girl outfits, which, at the time I thought, figure skaters were also very awesome. So.
All right, well, let me throw it to Herb, and I'm going to come back to you, Deborah, also. All right, so we're reading comic books. We all get that. There's an attraction there. But really, at the very center of it all, for you, Herb, I mean, what made you go there? What kept you going? For me, it was a little bit of fantasy, although I admit I wanted it to be possibly reality, which is why I always did like the Batman thing. But what about for you? I mean, is it escapism? What was the draw for you?
I was always a reader as well, and I would read books, of course. I think for me, it's the artwork. I've noticed I'm always, I've always been drawn to good artwork, or maybe that's when it started. But I think as much as anything, the books I would read had to have artists I like, or I wouldn't really read them. So I think artwork was just the panel to panel. I think they had a lot to do with it. I don't know if it was so much escapism, probably a little bit, after a while, because I like more the Fantastic Four, which is more cosmic. But I like Spider-Man as well. Yeah, I really think for me it probably was escapism, but the artwork I like. I was drawn to good artwork, which is why, I was a big Severin fan, because he was the first guy, this is later on, my favorite craft, but he was the first guy that could really that I saw, that could make a face look like a face, and when he drew somebody, as far as, obviously Crack did a lot of TV and movie parodies, you knew who he was drawing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, yes, I'd say art for me was a big draw as well.
All right, real quick, Herb, as a follow-up, too. I mean, did you ever try drawing yourself?
Yeah, of course, definitely tried. I wasn't really that good at it. A couple times I would get a decent panel, and a friend of mine and myself, we would, I actually met him at the day camp, of all things, and he was a comic book fan, too, and we'd try to do our own comics and stuff, and a couple times, and I would copy several stuff, and a couple times I could get a decent panel in, but I'm really not that good of an artist. Maybe if I'd applied myself and taken lessons or something, but my stepdaughter's actually was a really good artist, and so's my wife, and so's my other stepdaughter. They're all in my wife's family. The artwork seems to run in their family.
Yeah, well, you had nothing to contribute to that, did you?
So, no, unfortunately.
Real quickly, too, I want to say that although I'm in Florida and Herb's in New York and Deborah's out in California, Big Jim is working the board. He's in Illinois. And surprisingly, Jim, Deborah, he says he remembers Saturn Girl. All right.
Yay, Jim. See? There are people who know these characters very, very well.
I'll talk to him about that later. But anyway. But Deborah, what about it for you? I mean, I know that you were always an RC person. It didn't surprise me when I saw your name roll up on producer of The Spirit. I mean, after all these years. But anyway, so what was the draw for you? I mean, were you involved anywhere in the artistic element, or did you like storytelling? What was the deal?
Yeah, look, I also, was a huge reader in general, not just comic books, a lot of comic books, but I also read a lot of books, and very, very, I was always years ahead of my age for reading because I was just this huge reader. But the truth is, I'm a very visual person, and the art is, I think, key to it all because, like, Herb was saying, if I didn't like the artist, I would not like the book. I mean, and if somebody, and the worst was when, and I'm sure you had this experience, when you loved a book and then they changed the artist and the characters didn't look the same. Yeah. That would be so upsetting to me, I would really be upset by that, and I kind of, so that its connection to the visual was huge, and I am a big art fan. I mean, in later years, I studied a lot of art. I'd go all over Europe, and I'm a big fan of certain artists, and certainly an impressionist and different art schools, and, I pride myself in being able to pick out certain painting styles. And so, yes, and I think, I'd said this to you, and we talked earlier, Keith, that I feel that so many filmmakers start out by being huge fans of comics, and what we don't, even realize is what we've been learning is how to tell a story in what is essentially a storyboard. because later on when we make movies, we look at things from that perspective of how we're going to tell a tale in how many images, basically. And something about that just struck that chord with me. And later on, and throughout, school, and as I did do performing, and I did all those things, but it was also always visual. I did try to make my own little movies, and I did paint for a while and draw for a while, and I would try to copy the comics and do the cover of the matchbooks and all of those things. I never, was a great artist, and my son is even more talented at those things and a more talented artist, but we all had a bit of that in us in our family. So I do think it was the artwork that's the major attraction of comic books, definitely.
Well, you bring up a good point now, and this also is something that leads into your career right now and the one that you've had for many decades. When I got into college and took some film courses, it never struck me that there were storyboards which were very much visual. I mean, I was always thinking of text. I was a writer myself, but I only thought about the printed word. And I never realized that there were storyboards and basically what you would call like screenshots, if you will. Now, will you tell us about that process? Because I think that's something that escapes most people when they think about the making of a film from the very beginning. How does that all work out with the printed word and the visual?
Well, look, they're equally important in a film. In a book, all that matters is the printed word, right? But when you go to the medium of storytelling, look, if you're the kind of producer and filmmaker I am, and I've also directed movies, you are all about storytelling, right? And it's just what form we tell it in. We could tell it on a TV show, we could tell it on a big screen, we could tell it on the internet, but it's all about telling stories, and books are about telling stories. So people who are in love with sort of storytelling go to film, and then they want to tell the story both in the words and in the visuals. When I first started, first of all, my father was a film editor, and he was a film editor in New York, so I did learn stuff at a very young age, and I would go visit him sometimes at his work, and so I did start to put together image and story very, very early, probably from that influence as well. But when I very first started, I started doing commercials to be, at the very beginning, the first professional work I did. In college, I had done a lot of drama, a lot of acting, but I started doing commercials, and I would do a storyboard. I mean, I'd have to, because to sit there and figure out, especially in the beginning, how I was going to tell this copy. And if you work with an ad agency, they would do boards. But even if you were doing some of the lower budget stuff, you were doing it with, local companies and stuff at the very beginning, you'd sit down and you'd board it out. How am I going to do this? What's going to be the shots? We think about how can we tell the story in the best way, the most dramatically with the shots. Is it going to be close-ups? Is it going to be wide shots? Will the camera pan? Because all those things are different techniques in how you tell a story. Because when you direct film, you are deciding where the audience's eye goes as how you frame the shot and how you people the shot. When people go to the theater, they can watch the stage and they decide how to look, where to look when they want to look close on a person's face or whatever. And as a theater director, and I've done some of that too, you have to do certain things to sort of draw them. But as a film director, you decide if they're close up, if they're far away, whatever. And so that's a very significant part of how we tell a story and how people are impacted by a story emotionally. And storytelling has to always affect people on an emotional level. Intellectual is not enough. It has to be emotional, and part of that is how it's framed, how it's pictured, how the lenses are, how the backgrounds look. So right from the minute you consider making a story, a movie, when you're going to make a movie, it often starts with somebody just either telling you a story, they pitch to you, or you might read a script, but as you read that script, to be a filmmaker, you have to start to visualize immediately. What does this look like? Who are the people? What is the world around them? What am I showing? So it's all part of it from the very first day, and that's what I think what comic books gave us, was that sense right away. I knew what it looked like when when a great artist shows you. It's not all the pictures are not all the same. Some of them are close-ups. Some of them are wide shots. Some of them have an action sense to them in comic books. That translates perfectly to when you start planning a screenplay.
Just on the by, they on I guess Turner Classic Movies, they've been doing some stuff about Hitchcock, and I'm just wondering, was it Hitchcock that was so fastidious about the storyboards? Was he one that was really, more replete and covered everything?
He's one of my favorites, first of all, and it's
okay.
There's a book called Truffaut Hitchcock that is my favorite film book. I give it to everybody who works for me and all my young writer-directors and all, and in which Truffaut originally was a journalist before he became a great filmmaker, and he interviewed Hitchcock about every single one of his movies. And I've seen every one of his movies. I'm a huge fan. And the thing about that is Hitchcock was an artist. He was a fine artist in his own right and a production designer. And he comes completely from an artist point of view, and that's why his storyboarding was extremely complete. He did it himself. Oftentimes directors don't. We hire other people, or they hire other people to do it that are better artists than them. You do your own little sketching sometimes, no matter what, but in Hitchcock's case, he was a full-blown artist. Frank Miller does it on storyboards too. There are certain artists who don't, certain directors who've been able to, but Hitchcock came from the perspective of being a fine artist and being somebody who could draw brilliantly.
It also seems
and yes, he ordered it all. Sorry.
Yeah, he seemed to be just more hands-on. I mean, when they had these interviews with people, some said he was a son of a bitch, others loved him. I mean, you kind of got the idea, but it always seemed to me that he was, and I kind of like this in a sense, that he was extremely organized and knew exactly what he wanted, so there was no wasting time as to what was going to happen. This is the way it's going to be, and he got it done that way, and it seemed obviously to work.
Well, you know what? That's what makes a great, in my opinion, and I've worked with many, many directors, a great director is somebody who knows what they want. They have a clear vision in their head of what their movie's going to look like in every aspect. Not just, who's going to play the part or what the script's going to say, but how every frame of the film will look, how the colors will be, what the size will be. And Hitchcock, he did things in a time when he was creating film technique. He would do shots that never had been done before. He didn't have a Steadicam, and there's shots that he did in his movies that I still to this day am not quite sure how he accomplished. Or he would do something like the movie Rope, in which he just did it with 2 cuts in the whole movie. It's not cut. He planned that out. To do that, you have to be incredibly precise, believe me. To do something in 2 takes like that, that's just unbelievable pre-planning. But it works because, and look, we always know what a Hitchcock movie is. When we see one, because he had a real style. It's an artwork when the right person's doing it.
We're at the bottom of the hour. I want to let everybody know this is VYZYGOTH'S Clubhouse. We're talking with Herb Smith from the Utikins. You've heard her before about Cracked and Mad. We're going to talk about Eerie and Creepy in the second hour. We're also with Deborah del Prete, as we said, a film producer from Hollywood and somebody I knew back from Jersey, and was very happy to reconnect with her. Deborah, by the way, I have a link up to Coronet. Do you want to add anything about what's there on Coronet and what people could be looking forward to in the future?
Well, I guess Coronet is my own company, but the next movie that I'm executive producer of is a film called Ender's Game, which is based on a very, very well-known series of sci-fi novels by Orson Scott Card. It's coming in about a month or so, and it's Harrison Ford and Viola Davis and Asa Butterworth, Haley Stayfield, and it's a pretty exciting sci-fi movie. That's the next thing up. I have a number of films in development, too, that go next year. One called The Submarine Kid, another one called Third. And there's a lot of stuff on our slate other than that, so many, many more things to come.
All right. What I want to get back to also, and Herb and I think are agreed on some of the artists that he's involved with, Severin being the foremost. Are we thinking that perhaps we had, shall we say, the best artistry that we ever saw in comic books? I've not, to tell you the truth, I volunteered at a detention center, which was an open ranch for children. And some of them like comic books, but I was like at a loss to find out what was out there. But they all seemed, now we're talking about the late 90s. They wanted X-Men. And I'd go out and buy them for them. And, I was surprised they were a little pricey, but it's okay. So what? But, that's the only thing I ever saw. And we look at cartoons today, and they seem not to be animated as well as they were in the old days with Warner Brothers and such. So, Herb, I'll get to you with Severin in just a second because I think we agree that he is absolutely excellent and his stable as well. Deborah, what about that? I mean, I don't know that you necessarily keep a pulse on comics any longer, but did we have a special time? I mean, with the people who worked on those comic books.
Well, here's the thing: the comic book industry is not that old of an industry. It really didn't. It was really between late 30s, early 40s.
Mm-hmm.
It's really where it started. So it's not around that long, to be honest. And those guys, a lot of those guys were really the ones who are the innovators only because no one had done it before. Many of them were really great artists, but there have been a lot of great artists, I think, in each generation. And frankly, there's such volume now. I mean, when we were kids, there were two comic book companies, Marvel and DC. Then there were 100, 200, 300, 500 comic book companies. There's not even as many quite now as there were, I'd say, 10 years ago. But the thing is that there's a lot of good artists out there. There's a lot of really talented people out there. There were some greats in the past. I think there's probably as many greats around. Maybe they don't get to work as consistently as some people did at that time because, again, it was not as diluted as it is now. It's more economically, I think, probably challenging today. But there's some really terrific still artists, and I think there will always be. I mean, I've worked with a couple of great artists and fascinating artists and known others, and I think there'll always be other great talented artists that can come along and do this. But I think that each generation has their own, but there were some really brilliant guys at the beginning, and they were inventing.
Mm-hmm.
They were inventing, so that makes them sort of special.
Herb, you have no argument from me because I have to admit I was always impressed. I mean, Mad Magazine does exist to this day, there's no doubt, but when I look back to what I was looking at through the 60s and 70s and 80s, I mean, it never really got old, and the artistry was excellent. Plus, I have to admit, I mean, with Cracked and Mad, I mean, there were a lot of side jokes I didn't even understand when I was a kid, but my father was laughing his butt off, so I knew there was something there. But there's a lasting quality, isn't there, about... I talk about eerie and creepy in the same vein as I do Mad and Cracked. I mean, they were just a great group at that time. And is that something also that you feel probably will never be replicated?
Yeah, I don't follow comics, obviously, really anymore. I'm going to have to start going looking and seeing something. But to me, like the entertainment comics, the EC veterans pretty much paved the way. I mean, obviously... Jack Kirby and Will Eisner were the original guys, really. And then EC really picked up and ran with it, I think. And those guys will always be legends. And EC will, because you're the first, you're the innovators. You're always going to be there, And the draftsmen and the artists they turned out for EC were just incredible. Severin, Wood, L. Williamson. I think Reed Crandall's later, but he was a Warren guy, and Warren, which we'll talk about, eerie and creepy, in the next hour, picked up where EC left off, and actually got some of the artists from EC, like Severin and Wally Wood, who I mentioned, and Al Williamson, and they took those guys, guys like that, and because that's how important EC was to like Jim Warren and to comic book aficionados. And to me, that was a golden era.
Mm-hmm. And there were so many great.
Marvel also had. Yeah, what's that?
There were so many.
Marvel also had their. Marvel also had. I mean, Jack Kirby is in Chris Knowles' book. He's raves. Who was your guest? He raves about Jack Kirby. One of the sites I go to, it has it's called Atlas something to do with Atlas, but the top 100 comic book artists of all time. And Jack Kirby's number 1, and Will Eisner is number 2. And those guys just paved the way, And I wasn't as much a Kirby fan. Maybe I'm starting to appreciate him a little bit more now. But even fans of his will say, yeah, at times you could see he was kind of blocky in the way he drew fingers. But I think I appreciate now more the imagination. Back in the day, I was all for realism. which is why I like
Right.
Severin so much. And, now I'm starting to appreciate, like, the guys like Kirby and Neil Adams, who I think is outstanding. And
Neil,
one of the things about Severin...
Neil Adams is such a talented artist. I know Neil. I've been lucky to work with all these people. Of course, I'm sure you all realize, or probably guessed, that I did get to know Will Eisner before he passed away. I actually had the luck, especially as somebody who was a great comic fan my whole life, to actually option the Spirit and speak to Will about it and his visions for it. And I'm very fortunate that I think I told you this, Keith, I have one of the original pages of the Spirit, his artwork from 1939, from his when it originally appeared in newspapers. I have one of his originals. And I obviously I work very closely with Frank Miller, who was really a true protege of Eisner. And I have some of his artwork, but I've also met Neil Adams, and I've been to his studio. And Neil is an incredible artist, almost in the Renaissance sense. If you really look at his work closely, especially when you see all the original stuff, when we're reading comic books, they're great and they're beautiful and they're printed. But if you go back and see any of their original work, the lines and everything, it's just incredible what really fine artists some of the comic book artists are.
I'm going to open up the lines. I'm sorry, go ahead, Herb. You want to react to that?
Oh, I was just going to say, Deborah, I'm not sure if we put up some, for the hour we're going to do, I sent Biz some of the creepies and eerie's, and he put up some scans. And are you familiar, of course, you've heard of Warren Comics, right? Creepies and eerie's.
Yeah, of course. And I've read many of them.
I figured it. Yeah, I guess their story, the hands-down story that's considered to be the best, is Neil Adams' Thrill Kill. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
Yes. Neil Adams,
that's considered the best.
Fabulous work.
And they said the writer, I think Jim Stenstrom, said this was for Neil, or I think either Jim Stenstrom or the editor Bill Dubé said this is for Neil Adams, because all the shots he did from up above, it's about a guy gets on a rooftop and starts killing people, but the angles that he had to do, and they said only Neil Adams could do it.
Well, and Neil sees himself, I know Neil, I've been with him a number of times, he also sees himself as like a filmmaker. He sees, and he does definitely have a filmmaker's perspective of storytelling, and that's what he draws, and he definitely sees things as a filmmaker sees things. There's no question. Well,
real quick, one of the things I liked about Severin is maybe he wasn't as innovative as like an Adams, but in addition to his ability to draw faces especially and capture expressions, one of the things I like about Severin is he always had things going on in the background just to tell a story. And I always thought it was kind of like watching a film with Severin, too, because some artists would just put a little bit in the foreground and didn't have the detail a guy like Severin would have. But Severin would always have little incidental things going on in the background.
Right.
And it had a good flow to it.
That was kind of a hallmark of his, right? You'd look for those pieces.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah, the detail he put in was incredible. And his stories to me were so readable. I could always read a Severin story because it was so clean and like you say, some art. If the art, sorry, go ahead.
You would always know his work too. That's the other thing with those artists. Neil Adams, you never mistake Neil. You see his work, you know it's his work.
Let me interject.
Will Elder was like that. I knew Will Elder as well. Who was basically mad, right? But, I knew his work was beautiful work. And you could tell it was his right away. The lines somehow were different.
We may have a caller. I didn't release a number, but let me ask. Jim, do we have anybody coming in here? All right. We'll let that ride. But let me give the number. Yeah, we do have a caller. Okay, caller, if you're there, come on.
Hello. It's Karen.
The crazy lady.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, kid.
Yeah. Yes, it's me. Hi there, Deborah and Biz and everybody. Triplicate Girl. I love the sound of Triplicate Girl. I never heard of it before, but that sounds so cool. Triplicate Girl. But I was going to say that everything you said, Deborah, was really neat because you were talking about that you were a tomboy, and your best friend at at some certain point of your age was a guy, and me too. And but I never touched dolls. I hated dolls. But I did all that stuff, and I also was an early reader and also picked up on the comic books early. But as I was saying earlier in the evening to somebody, I was really drawn right away to the sort of crime comics. And because my brother would read those, those, some of them were kind of, suggestive things like, crime does not pay and stuff like that. But I liked them because when I was a kid, I always enjoyed those, like film noir and the crime stories. And I noticed that these comics were exactly like that to me. And I always was looking all the time. Yeah, I wasn't specific. Like I didn't have a favorite or anything, but I was always looking at the variety store. I'd go with my dad, and that's the comic I would always look for because the comics really, to me, looked like the movies, and they were great stories. I thought,
Yeah, well, that's Pulp Fiction. Comics that were those crime stories were kind of Pulp Fiction, and Frank Miller is a person who owes a great deal to film noir. His style, and if you look at Sin City and of course The Dark Knight, and when Frank came up, he made a turn in comics, and it's because he was a huge fan of those old movies that you're talking about, those old detective movies and crime dramas that were very film noir. And those were reflected in those comics you're discussing, and then we see it again in Frank Miller's work.
Yeah, and sorry, yeah.
No, Karen, if you got a follow-up question, go ahead. We have another caller, so by all means, if you have a follow-up, go ahead. Otherwise, go home.
Yeah. I will, but I think I just wanted to mention that you guys were talking about something else to do with movies too. But my daughter brought home a comic not too many years ago, and I haven't been following anything, but it was an anthropomorphic, sorry, the word, I don't know the name of the cartoonist, but it was called Why Are You Doing This? And it was about a serial killer, but it was animals. Like it was very sparely drawn animal characters. And it was very dark, but I kind of thought it was really neat. I think the guy was Norwegian or something. I don't know if you've heard of that.
Watch it.
Yeah, I know.
Well, I just want to say, if you go to Comic-Con ever, you'll find a comic book about everything in the universe you could imagine.
Terrific.
All right, Karen, thank you for the call. We appreciate it.
Oh, okay. Bye-bye.
God bless you. Take care. That was Crazy Karen from Canada, the linchpin of the empire. But no, she's good. Also, what I want to ask you before we get into the spirit, I'd like to talk to you about that a little bit before we go. We had to drop our call off, so caller, if you're out there, come on back. And by the way, the number is, if any of you really need it, is 618-219-8824. That's 619. That's 618-219-8824. I call it all the time. Anyway, what I wanted to get to also, Deborah, this is something about Hitchcock also, and also framing things. And the reason I bring this up is because, and this goes back to the definition of terror and horror. What's the difference? But here's where I'm going with this. What Hitchcock could do with a close-up on the turning of a doorknob would drive me up a wall scared. Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
I mean, you didn't need slashing. I mean, he just was saying today, I passed by the TV while Lady Viz had it on, and he was saying, in the scene in Psycho, which everybody gets all upset about, he goes, you never see the knife touch the woman's flesh. And that's true.
No.
But
there's another element, right? There's another element. It's not just the visual, though. What else is it? The music, the sound effect. It's that film thing. And he was very precise with all of that. That's the thing about filmmaking. It's a couple of things. It's the story. It can be words, but it's visuals, but it's also sound. It's music and sound effects.
Also, despite the fact that I can't remember the phone number to call in, we do have another caller, and by all means, come on, caller.
Hi. Hello, Liz. Herb. Hello, Deborah.
Hi.
First of all, I don't want to forget this, but my whole family is so excited for Ender's Game. I had no idea you were producing that.
Well, I think one of the producers on it, but yeah, thank you.
Oh, well, thank you for that. I was going to ask you, I was listening to Kevin Smith's show, and he said that movies had rejuvenated the comic book genre, even though it had changed it. And I was wondering, as someone who read them back then and then has seen modern day interpretations, do you think that they've enhanced it or changed it, or what differences do you see?
Well, it's funny because I was on a panel with him, or right after him, and because he's a huge comic fan, Kevin, and he's always been very involved, from the beginning of his career. But look, I think yes, it's been a two-way street. I think that they have had first the comic books affected the movies because they were the source, but then once movies fully embraced comics and started to make comics, then we started to see movies that were comic book movies not coming from comic books, and also the movies affecting how the next generation of comic books were written. I mean, there's a company that, Dark Horse, that ended up making a whole genre of comics that were based on movies, not the other way around. So definitely it's been back and forth. And I don't, look, everything moves forward. I think the world's gotten better at storytelling. When you go back to some old comics, I mean, yes, they're still enjoyable in certain ways, but sometimes you go back and you think, well, that wasn't as great a story as I thought. And yet when you see some of the newer stories in comics, they're much more complex and multi-layered, much like television. I mean, we used to think the golden age of television was long in the past, and there was the great Playhouse 90 and all that. Yeah, there was some great stuff, but man, are we having some incredible television today in this new generation of the cable channels and Breaking Bads and Homeland and things like that. They're fabulous and multi-layered storytelling that years ago would have been in great movies. So I think that they overall have improved as a result of it, but there's definitely been a two-way street. It's affected each other, but I think they're more interesting and better, but the other side of it is they're not as fresh or new or interesting as some of the original guys were because a lot of it's been done.
Well, see, for me, I was like an Archie, Veronica, Betty comic book fan, and wasn't introduced to Wonder Woman until Linda Carter's Wonder Woman. So I guess it's kind of a give and take. You can be introduced to the movies, and then I picked up the comic books.
Right. Back and forth, back and
forth.
Well,
thank you very, very much. I know I'm probably taking up your time, but thank you, and good night. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, Kira. Appreciate it. I got a little story about, I can't believe Kira was talking about Archie Comics because I met the daughter of Bob Montana, but that's for the second hour. Anyway, but Deborah, I tell you what, I'm wondering, and I've been wanting to ask you the whole show, and that is, when you took on the task of the Spirit, was that something that was driven by your love for comics, and it would seem to be a little connectivity there? Is that the case?
Absolutely. I mean, my whole career I was wanting to do something with comics. It was very hard to get those rights at that point. They were all tied up all over the place. And just by a series of crazy events, I was able to find the person who had the rights. He came to me, actually, because I owned a theater in Los Angeles as well, the Coronet Theater, which is what the film company's named after. And I met this man, Michael Uslan, who had the underlying rights to a lot of comics. He had worked at DC very early on as a kid, when nobody thought those rights were going to be very meaningful. And in fact, he even had the Batman rights, which had already been made at the point I got the Spirit rights. But he had the Spirit, and I was super excited to be able to get rights for one of the, seminal comics, and then have the ability to work with, meet Will Eisner and work with it. That was, major for me to be able to work on a comic book, for sure.
Deborah, we have a caller, too, I think, again. Caller, if you're there, please come on.
Hello?
You're on. Yes, hello.
Hey, Gino. How you doing, Viz? Hello, everybody. I just wanted to pose a question to
Deborah?
Miss Del Prete, Deborah, who happens to have the same name as my wife, but we had did a trip to California a few years ago, and we had gone to Bodega Bay, where they film the birds. And one of the things we found out, to our dismay a little bit, it was a really great place that we stayed at, but in the early afternoons, it gets incredibly windy there. And even if you look at the greenery and the trees and the growth, it all grows, it's all bent sideways from the wind. And I just want to know if you have any insight as to how they filmed and got the birds to agree, during the filming of the birds during that, in that climate. It's incredibly windy there. And it blows the power lines down and the power goes out. And, we had gone to a point where they have a memorial to fishermen and stuff who died out there from the winds in the seas and everything like that. So I just wanted to know, how they, if you have any insight as to how they actually got those birds to, quote unquote, cooperate during the filming of that movie.
Well, there's a lot of pieces to that question because, first of all, birds, depending on training, it's very difficult. I did a movie once with a bird. And it was just so difficult to get the bird to do what we needed it to do. Oh my gosh. So, first of all, it's what kind of birds do they have? Were they trained birds? But probably a lot of those shots were composited shots. And that means that they necessarily weren't shot where they were physically done. The birds were not necessarily there.
Yeah, some scenes you can tell.
Yeah, a lot of that is compositing. But having said that, even in a place like that, I'm sure there's months when there's no wind. Like, for example, I shot in Oregon once, and I shot in Eugene, Oregon, a movie. And, we'd go up to Oregon and scout, and it'd be raining and raining and raining. And they were like, look, it's going to stop raining on July 1st, and then it's not going to rain for 6 weeks, and then it's going to rain again. And I was like, the whole time I'm thinking, oh, my God, how is
pressure for the schedule, right?
And I have to tell you, I'm not joking, it did stop July 1st. And it was sunny for 6 weeks, and 6 weeks later it started raining again. And we shot in that 6 weeks. It was great. I never had a day I lost the whole day, ever. Once or twice I got rain in, a piece of a day, but it was true. And so actually, I'm guessing that there's probably a time that's quieter, calmer there, and they probably pick that, piece of time when the conditions are the best, and they knew because they knew what that weather was. So that was probably part of it, but the other part of it is probably what I said, that some of those shots were just done other places, and they were just composited in, and, they had really good trained birds, and a lot of it was also just animation, too. Like, there was some animated birds. So a lot of
all right, cool. Yeah, no, you can tell, like, when you watch the movie where they inserted, parts, that were constructed as the live, but actually you can actually go to the house where they used the school, where they filmed the school scenes. But when you go to that house, it's actually a lot smaller than what you think it is when you watch the movie.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's
it's really good. Yeah, it's unbelievable. He used some serious techniques to make the school, because he was filming from inside the school out.
Yeah.
And it looks so much bigger from the inside.
Yeah. Right.
And when you go, it's a lot smaller. Actually, the descendants of the people who own the house live there, and they're very eclectic. And, they're very, they're into the hippie thing and stuff like that. But you can go there and without going on the property, and actually, they allow you to film or take shots if you want. And, my last comment is that I grew up kind of, I was into DC a little bit, but Marvel was my favorite due to the fact that I think the writing, they were more clever and they were a lot more funnier and sarcastic in their, in a lot of the superheroes, it was a lot more, less wholesome than DC was. DC was more wholesome, right? And Marvel was not. Well, anyway, thank you for letting me call in, and nice show. And Vince, good to talk to you again.
Gino,
hello.
Gino, thanks a lot for calling. Gino's from Brooklyn, And I just want to say, Deborah, because I know we got to let you go, Gino's a pretty decent photographer who works a lot, with shadows and angles and black and white. Does a really great job, so I think that's one of the reasons why, Gino, you called, and I appreciate that, because you're pretty good in screen composition.
Well, thank you for the comment.
All right, bro. Take care of yourself.
Thank you very much. You take care too, buddy. Love you.
All right, bye-bye. All right, Deborah, we got a couple of minutes to go, but I would like, for you to at least comment about the spirit. And I want to tell you something also, and like I said, I'm a bad barometer for films, because I like stuff that it's consumer. I mean, they love it out there. I don't. The spirit I like, but I think you can understand that also, and I think Herb feels the same way. We kind of like the film noir. We like the comic noir. We like mysterious, not necessarily, I don't know, homicidal, if you will. We like the things that happen in shadows, and I think you try to capture that. It was almost like the movie was done in charcoal in a sense, and that was fine with me, and I think Herb feels the same way. You take a shot, what happens, happens, but I think that was a meritorious thing, and your thoughts on the spirit and whether or not you would ever try to bring another character, because that's one of the emails I got before. Would you ever try to bring one of the characters from the comics to life on the screen, perhaps one that is not well known, which I think makes it all the more fun? Your take.
Well, sure. You always listen. I'm not discouraged by something like the spirit. I've made a lot of movies in my life. Some have been huge successes. Some have been medium. Some have been failures. That's what happens. Because with the spirit is one artist's expression. It's Frank Miller's perspective. The reason the film looks that way is because that's his art. He did not want colors very saturated. He made sure we pulled the color out of everything. He wanted visuals. He storyboarded the entire movie, every single shot. Every single shot we shot in that movie had been pre-storyboarded. We'd shoot at the beginning of the day, we'd had this big board, we'd put up all the frames he wanted to shoot that day from that he had drawn himself. And we'd put them all up, and then we'd progress for the day's shooting and get all those shots. So, and then when we worked in post, because it was a massive post, because every single shot in that movie, every frame, is basically a visual effect, because all the backgrounds and everything are put in, because he wanted it to look like a giant comic book, and I think it does visually.
Yes.
I think it looks like one of his comic books, and that in itself, I think, has made it very unique, and it also probably made it hard for some people to like, as much as it made some others like it visually. And it wasn't the typical film medium they were used to. But, you go out on a limb and you do something sometimes, and it wasn't that well received, but I think as an artist, Frank made a very pure artist statement and a very pure artist vision, and I always think that's worth doing. And sometimes when you do that, you take a huge risk, and you're Kubrick in doing 2001. I'm a huge Kubrick fan, and by the way, so is Frank Miller. And when we first met, we bonded over 2001, which is why I became a filmmaker, by the way. It's the movie that was my film that I saw as a kid and went, oh my gosh, I have to do that. I have to make those things. How can you take somebody out into space? Which is why, making sci-fi movies is a big deal to me, too. And so I think that you roll those dice and you take a big risk, and sometimes it's a huge failure, and sometimes it's a humongous success. And then sometimes you open up something to people that they never thought they could see that way before. And so I'd always try again, and if I found some great story and I could get people to give me money to make it, because that's part of my job too, I would do it again, of course. It's all about that. It's all about telling one more story or trying one more different thing or getting another idea and putting it up there and finding a way to make it up there. And, look, as filmmakers, we paint a canvas with hundreds of people. It's not, one artist, and that's the difference. Frank can sit in his room and just draw that picture, but when we make a movie, we have to have all these talents and artists, and as a producer, you start that process often. I find that story, and then I bring to it the writer, the director, then the director is, together we cast and do this whole long process that starts with just the idea of a story, and I'm always open to, finding something new to tell about in some manner. So, yes, I would do it again.
All right, I'm all for that. And before we let you go, because I know we're running overtime, and I thank you, Deborah, for the time you spent with us, but Herb, while you have Deborah here, I don't know if you want to address anything that you might have wanted to with regard to Miller or Eisner, but if you do, and you may not, Herb, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I mean, you have her here, Deborah, so is there anything you'd like to ask her before she has to go?
No, I'd just like to say both Eisner and Miller are innovators from two different eras, and those guys are, Eisner pretty much he was like number 2 art right behind Kirby. He's well regarded for his role in the comic book industry, and Frank Miller, on the other end, is kind of known as reinventing the comic book industry. Yep. So those are two great guys to work on a project with.
I was very fortunate. I will say this. It was sort of, to me, and I don't know that I could ever compare anything again, for someone who loved comics as a kid, for somebody who was an important part of my background, it was sort of an ultimate thing. I spent almost 2 years of my life working very closely with Frank. I got to know, Will. I got to know Will even more through Frank, who was his student and who loved him dearly and who really cared about making a film he thought Will would have enjoyed and liked, and Will was an innovator. And I was unbelievably blessed to get to do it with people who were heroes of mine, and it was a very lucky thing. I have a lucky life to have been able to do that, and I'm grateful for it.
Deborah, thanks for the time you spent with us. Folks, Coronet Entertainment, you can check it out. The link is on the promo for this show. I just can't tell you how much I thank you for it. It was great hooking up with you. I mean, the fact, if I had dreamed about how it would go between us after, many, many years without any contact, it could not have been better than the way you received me, and I thank you very much for that.
Oh, you're more than welcome. I enjoyed it. It was great to connect with you, and hopefully we can connect, some more and connect about people from our past again. And you guys have a good next hour, and wish you the best with everything, and it was really fun to be on.
All right, God bless you, Deborah. Thank you very much.
Good night, Herb. Okay, bye-bye.
Good night, Dawn. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, we're going to take a break for about 5 minutes. We'll get back, and we'll be with Herb and Creepy and Eerie. All right, we are already in hour 2 with our show about when comics were king and queen. If you've listened to Deborah del Prete through that first hour. Herb, I just want to share one thing with you. If you don't mind, please bear with me. And by the way, great calls. Kira, Karen, and Gino. Great stuff. And not to kiss up to anyone in particular, but Gino, especially, I understand he sent me a lot of his photos. Worked a lot in black and white, which I love, and I think is too little done these days. And I can understand why he asked the questions he did of Deborah, and also Kira and Karen. So thank you very much. We do have that call-in number, which I never can remember, and I'll give it to you later if I feel like. But I do want to tell you this, Herb, and we're going to go into Creepy and Eerie, and this is kind of like an audience participation thing, too, because if you go to any of the portals through which you entered this show, you'll see a number of links to PDFs of some of the Creepy and Eerie artwork and actually stories. Let's call them what they are, stories. And so be ready to do that if you want to follow along with us. So take a look now while I bloviate endlessly about this next thing I want to tell you about. But Herb is going to address Creepy and Eerie. And like I said, take a look at those links that are up top because we're going to go to them. And I think you would like to, if you're near your computer, which you have to be to listen to this, take a look at where we're going to go. But here's what I want to tell you real quick. War story has to do with Archie. I'm playing the Cape Cod League in 1971, which is a college league for really good ball players, okay? And I'm playing for Wareham, which is a horrible town out on the Cape. It's the first one. It's not really on the Cape. You have to go through Wareham to get across the bridge into Bourne, and the rest of what really is the Cape. All right, big deal. So what's the story? The thing is, it was boring. It was horrible. I felt like I was in, like, a watery desert, if you can imagine that. And one day, down the road upon which we lived, comes this white van, like U.S. Mail, and Herb will relate to that. They're the same to this day. I mean, they're just a van, a step van, and it was a U.S. mail truck, but it had been painted, it had been whitewashed, and on it was painted U.S. female. Well, when you have 25, shall we say, rather culturally and sexually deprived males, we all went back into our cottages and got all spruced up. And I happened to make the acquaintance of a girl by the name of Lynn Montana. I mean, Montana's kind of a different last name. I mean, I've heard it, but there's only one other time that I could really say it was memorable, and that was the creator of Archie was Bob Montana. So being the wise guy that I was, looking for an ice-breaking line, I saunter up to Lynn Montana. I said, like, so what is your dad, Bob? And she said, yeah, it is. He is. And I'm like, no. She goes, yeah, it is. And so we talked the night away. And so finally I got down to it. I'm saying, so who was your father in that in that comic strip? She goes, he was Jughead. And so I said, was there a Weatherby? Oh, she said, absolutely. So it was all Riverdale High School, which is in upper, New York. I mean, I don't know if it's upper Manhattan or lower Bronx, but that was all based on her dad's high school memories. Veronica and Betty, Moose, the whole 9 yards. And it was just a really great time. But I mean, for me to go ahead and pop off about, was your dad Bob? And she goes, yes. It was like, ooh. So, okay. It was a decent night. It was a really nice experience. So anyway, so much for my war stories. Now let's get down to the serious. Huh?
Do you think she would have gotten the line if her dad wasn't? If that wasn't her father, she probably wouldn't have gotten the reference.
Oh no, I mean, but you would agree, right? I mean, obviously I had the benefit of the conversation, but I mean, she talked a lot in depth about it, and I said to her, well, could you guess who my favorite girl was? And she said Betty, and I said, yeah, that's right. And Lynn had darker hair, and I mean, like kind of like amber and stuff, kind of shortcut. And she was up with a bunch of girls who can have a good time up in the Cape, and I'm sure they did, but I'll never forget that because actually scoring was not the idea at that time. She was so interesting. We had such a great conversation that it was so good to have that kind of thing going on. And I'll never forget that, So I met Bob Montana's daughter. So wherever you are, Lynn, thanks for that time. And lady just looks at me and she snorts through her nose.
Maybe we should get a hold of her and get her.
What's that?
I said maybe we should get a hold of her and get her on.
Oh, no. Lady, this is looking at me with daggers. That's not going to happen. But, it was, but I have to tell you also, and let me do this before I cut any more into your time, and get yourself ready for where we're going to go with the links so people can pull up those PDFs. What I wanted to tell you was, late one night, I can't sleep. Lady Viz is on the road. And I put the TV on. I'm sitting at the edge of the bed, and this thing, The Spirit, comes on. I'm like, okay, great. And I'm watching the credits roll. And sometimes you don't always have, like, replete credits at the beginning of the movie, but this one there was. And and as it rolled up on the right-hand side of the screen, it said producer, Deborah del Prete. And I'm like, no. But how many times do you see a name like that? And I never did anything about it. And, of course, you can attest to this. When we were kicking around a show about about eerie and creepy, I thought, let me do it. And I was like afraid to do it because, you get older and you just figure everybody's going to just blow you off, like, who the hell are you? And I contacted her, and as I said, it worked out great. But when I saw that name, it didn't strike me like it wasn't her because I remember her always being kind of like in theater and such. This was not a big leap, but still and all. But I sat on it, and then when we were talking about doing that show, I said, let me try to bring her in. And, of course, it worked out. And, I think you'll admit, she was a pretty regular person. It was kind of nice that this all happened. And I have to laugh because she said her downstreet neighbors are Brad and Angelise. I'm saying, so, they walk their dogs like everyone else and pick up the poop or what, so anyway. But let's get to where we were going with Creepy and Eerie. Now, you and I did a show about Cracked and Mad, and I will admit, honestly, Herb, they were excellent artists. And I never knew the names of Severin and stuff until you and Andy Sr. also, who's pretty much a fan of that, we're talking about the artistry and the dialogue and everything in the storyline. Now, let me ask you this. was there any kind of leap from Cracked and Mad? I mean, I kind of like isolate them to one side, and then think about Eerie and Creepy to another. Was there a disconnect there, or was there a time when there was a concurrency and these guys did a little bit of this and a little bit of that? What's the whole deal with that?
Yeah, they definitely worked. I mean, for me personally, it was Severin that got me into Creepy from Cracked, because a lot of these guys, I didn't know. So this, of course, this is really before comic book stores, before the internet, obviously, and I didn't know that these guys worked for all different companies. I didn't know they were doing different stories the same month for different comics. So yeah, they definitely worked for all different sorts. You know, they worked for all types of companies. And what happened, as we talked about with Andy, is EC folded because of the Senate hearings and Wordsman's seduction of the innocent. So the EC folded all their horror, you know, because they went after the horror comics and what they were doing to the youth. So a lot of these guys had to go somewhere. And Warren picked up where EC left off. Because, you know, people obviously, I mean, people loved the EC comic books, and they were gone. You know, so Warren picked up on you know, it was a continuation. He picked up where they had to drop the ball. What he did was, it was Jim Warren, who was a small independent publisher, and he had actually, have you ever heard of Famous Monsters of Filmland?
No, I haven't, no.
By any chance?
No.
Okay, that was about Famous Monsters of Filmland, and they had pictures of all, you know, monster movies, that type of thing. So Warren had published other things, but of course he was an EC fan, and so he published, Creepy was a black and white magazine, so I think that would bypass the Comics Code Authority. And so he continued with some of the same artists from EC to start a horror magazine, because, and it was all due to the old EC comics, and especially a writer and artist named Harvey Kurtzman, who I think probably should merit his own show someday. I think Andy would probably know more about him than I do, but he wrote for Mad, he wrote war magazines, he wrote horror. Kurtzman's a real big, he also works for Playboy. Kurtzman's a real big name. And Creepy owes everything to EC and Harvey Kurtzman.
All right, now, what I'd like you to do is, I'm just going to do a little bit here, but in the meantime, decide where you want to go with regard to the links so people can be ready more or less to pull up the PDFs. But I'll say this, the one thing that obviously, I mean, what I tended toward and why I like the spirit, and I think you feel this way to a certain extent as well, but I liked things that happen at night. I like film noir, not necessarily, you know, murder and mayhem, but just kind of like, I don't know, some kind of ability to like slip through the night to do good, if you will. And that was the idea of Batman, and that was the idea of the spirit. And also, if you think about it too, the Green Lantern. I believe that was also kind of in the same, you know, modality. And that to me was, I don't know, just something that appealed to me. And I never really was drawn to like all the superpower stuff, because it's like, you know, they can make anything happen, you know, so who cares? I mean, I don't think you really have to have much of a storyline if your hero, your protagonist, can like do anything. I like the ones that are somewhat, quote, if you will, hampered by being human. And in the old Batman, not in the Dark Knight era, but the old Batman, I like that because he pretty much had to handle stuff without all the gizmos. And of course, came out under Stealth of Night, and I'll just say that. And I said as well, I don't know how many people remember the Sunday comic strip, The Phantom, which I thought was excellent. I don't really understand.
Yeah,
I mean, the ghost that walks at night. Okay, I'm all right with that. But I mean, I just liked it because it's this. I don't know. I like things that go bump in the night, which is why I guess I did a damn conspiracy show for like 12 years. But at any rate, with regard to what you want people to take a look at, take us through where we should go and why we should be there.
Well, I guess one of the big things about Warren, and as I mentioned, with Deborah, is how much I was drawn to art. And Jim Warren had a great eye for art, and he's where an artist by the name of Frank Frazetta really will end up becoming pretty mainstream, as I mentioned to you before. If anyone's ever seen the Molly Hatchet covers, like Flirting with Disaster, that was Frank Frazetta. He pretty much created the fantasy genre. Well, Frank Frazetta, and we didn't put up the PDF, but anyone can look up Frank Frazetta Warren covers. Frank Frazetta gave Warren their look. He did most of the covers in the beginning, and Warren didn't have just like drawn covers like you would have with a comic book, like a color comic, but the black and whites. They had Frank Frazetta painted the covers, which I think took EC, or took the old. That was a step above EC. So artwork was a big thing with Jim Warren, and we have a couple links to some of the covers I like.
All right, go ahead.
And if we go to 63, 63 EERIE front cover. If you click on that one.
For folks understand that's below the top 5 or so. Go down below and you'll see what he's talking about. 63 EERIE front cover, correct?
Okay. Well, this is one. This was next. This is a Jackass cover by one of the Spanish artists. Warren had brought a lot of Spanish artists into the fold as well, and this is by a guy named San Julian. And this is a cover of one of the series that they ran called Jackass that I really like a lot. This is one of my favorite EERIE covers.
Well,
and also probably.
What made the Spanish illustrators that much of a hot item?
I think they were more flowing. I think there were less lines. They weren't quite as by the box. I guess would that be a way of putting it? As like an American artist,
right.
Panel by panel. They had more of a romantic, flowing feel to them, I think.
All right, I think back to my art classes, of which there were only 2 in college. But are you saying there was more of a kind of sculpted musculature kind of display of the human body, more so than you would find in what you would call like flattened characters?
Yeah, there was some of that, and there was it's hard to describe because it's one of those almost intangible type things. But they had almost more of an abstract quality to them, I think.
All right.
Rather than like an American artist, like even a Severin is pretty much more realistic, and I think the Spanish artist could be a little bit more abstract, a little bit more inventive to a certain extent.
And then the reason why this strikes
me not quite the draftsman. They weren't quite the draftsman the EC artists were. They definitely had a different feel to them.
Okay. Well, I mean, to me, it looks all right. This is the way I would explain it, and I'm no obviously aficionado of this kind of stuff, but I would say that it looks more 3D. Would that be accurate in a sense? More use of shadow?
Yeah, especially this cover for sure. I definitely you can see it. It's got a depth to it, I think.
Without a doubt.
And especially this particular cover would look like it's in a church, I believe. So it's got it's got almost caverns in the background, and they have a depth to them, and this particular one is definitely got a 3D feel to it.
Yeah, I would say I feel like I'm in like the 4th Malboge of hell with this one. So, But the thing that's interesting you mentioned about the Spanish illustrators, and we'll go on to the next PDF, and that is, do you remember? I mean, not that you should have to be someone who's astute in this particular genre, if you want to call it a genre at all. But I believe the Spaniards who did a lot of the artwork for fascism in the 30s in Spain. That genre ran and was carried off later on by Russia. Russian artists. And I don't know. I mean, can you visualize any of the fascist posters that you may have seen in the movies, where it was that was extremely abstract. But the thing is that whatever was happening in Spain, that carried also as a certain kind of motif into the rest of Europe, and of course you can argue in the Eastern Europe into Russia during that time. Can you? What is that movie, Lady Viz? What is it? Life Beautiful? It's a Beautiful Life. Life is what is it? Do you remember Life is Beautiful? That comedy that was, I guess, subtitled. It was in Italy.
Right. And talk about that.
We did talk about that, right? And I mean, you can see as the character goes through the streets and such, you don't pay attention to this necessarily, but the posters are on, the adobe walls or whatever, and then later on you see that carried also into Russia. But I'm just saying that whatever it was, apparently the Spanish motif, for whatever reason, carried well then, and apparently didn't do badly. And this is in the 70s, is it not, Herb?
Yeah, it's the 70s. He brought that. Now, the Creepies and EERIE started in the 60s, and they were more EC artists, American artists. Then they had a downturn when one of their best editors and writers, a guy named Archie Goodwin, left after 17 issues. Warren moved to, I think they were a Midwestern company, then they moved to New York City, so all their expenses went up. So Warren had a downturn where they almost went under, and they did a lot of reprints, and they did some substandard artists, substandard writers. But when they started to make their comeback in the 70s, especially when I started getting into them, that's when they had their influx of Spanish artists.
All right, so something definitely was going on there. So let's move on, if you will, to whatever you want to go. I mean, we have the links up there, so.
Yeah, just to highlight one of my favorite covers. Maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm getting about 6 or 7 down with a 64 EERIE front cover.
You're right. Underneath that particular break we have, EERIE, 64 EERIE front cover. Okay, I'm calling that up now. And
that's the Exterminator cover with the 2 robots.
Yeah, and if anybody calls this up, I just want to say, if anybody calls this up and they find the graphic too big, obviously with this PDF you can bring it back down to a reasonable size. But please go ahead. I'm sorry, Herb.
Yeah, this is before the Terminator and that type of thing. A lot of these Warren comics ended up almost becoming movies, and this is by actually Frank Frazzetta's wife's nephew, I believe. So he learned a lot from Frank Frazetta, and this particular artist, Ken Kelly, also did the cover for the Kiss Destroyer album. If anyone's familiar with that, it's just a cover. I think they used to sell T-shirts, and I'd love to have this on a poster or cover. And this is just, to me, it's just kind of indicative of what made Warren so good. Part of it was the inside artwork and their stories for sure, but they just had great covers. And when I started not collecting them anymore, I had a subscription to them. One of the things that really went downhill were their covers. Because Kelly had left that artist before, San Julian. They had a guy named Enrich. Their covers had really started to go downhill. But to me, that's what really set Warren apart. This is something I think that Warren was an innovator in with these covers, and especially bringing Frank Frazetta, who pretty much started the whole fantasy genre.
You know what this reminds me of too? Not that I care for the movie, but it does strike me as being in the same vein as this. Not that it's a big deal, but War of the Worlds, the modern one with Tom Cruise.
Mm-hmm.
That cover reminds me very much of that. I don't know if you remember the movie or not, but it's very, I don't want to say stick figure-ish, but very lean with these kind of characters. Did you see that movie, by the way?
No, I didn't see it. I'd sort of like to because Orson and H.G. Wells, right? I don't know if there's anything good in there, but
unfortunately,
winks and nods. But
well, it leaves the whole H.G. Wells thing. I mean, they go into a modernized version, and interestingly, it happens in Bayonne, New Jersey, which I remember very well. But it just that's the kind of caricatures that I saw. So I just was wondering if you saw that whatsoever. But go ahead with your next selection.
Well, since we mentioned Neil Adams, if we scroll down to the bottom, we have a PDF of Neil Adams from Creepy 75, Thrill Kill.
Okay.
And it'll give some people a little bit of idea of who Neil Adams is.
All right, so I'm looking through this thing. So Thrill Kill, yeah, okay, that's in the lower bunch also. About 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 down. Okay, got it.
But this is considered Warren's best story of all time. And I'm not sure if it was the writer or the editor, but they said for Neil Adams only. This was at least the writer had Neil Adams in mind for this script. And like Deborah said, he has a filmmaker's eye, I think. He has to do panels from all angles, especially from up above to down below. And this is considered Warren's best story. And Neil Adams, like Deborah said, when I was mentioning the 100 greatest comic book artists of all times from Atlas Comics, Neil Adams is actually number 3 behind Jack Kirby and Will Eisner. So this was probably the heyday of Warren horror magazines, because originally they started out as more, the vampires, Dracula, vampires, werewolves, that type of thing, kind of your standard horror. But later on, when they made their comeback and they went into more mature type things that weren't just about monsters, but day-to-day events and shooters on rooftops and psychological thrillers, this was from that era. To me, probably the best era. I even, as like Deborah said, I think sometimes the storytelling got better. I don't necessarily think a lot of times, like you said, I don't think the art. I'm not sure if the art in comics got better, but I think the storytelling definitely has to a certain extent. They get into more areas that they did back in the '60s. That's for sure.
Yeah. Okay. I'm looking at it now. Oof. All right. And which one? I'm sorry. That one is Thrill Kill, right?
Thrill Kill, right? That's again considered Warren's best story by far.
And what year is this?
I believe this was 75.
Yeah.
75?
But I mean, think about all the serial killers, and I'm not saying serial in the sense of, actually you should call them mass shooters, because they're not serial in the sense that they've done it time and time again. But when they decide to do whatever they do, they take a whole lot of people with them. But I mean, we all have to admit we've seen a rise in these kind of situations in the last 2 years or so. Does anything strike you about? I'm not saying they were. Well, here's the point: either they were lucky, in a sense, or they were plugged into what was going on. And I think that's an element that you wanted to bring out as well. Are we looking at people who kind of like got it like we do? We wouldn't call them conspiracy theorists at that time. We would say futurists. What about that? Because, in a sense, we've seen this kind of stuff play out time and time again with somebody who doesn't seem to be necessarily bull goose loony and yet, turns deadly with a firearm.
Well, the writer of this story, Thrill Kill, also wrote the one that I think we have a link to the Creepy 73 with the Unprovoked Attack on the Hilton Hotel. Well, this is the same writer. And Unprovoked Attack on the Hilton Hotel is kind of what started this whole thing when I sent it to you, as you know. And that was basically a story. It was an allegory for Pearl Harbor, between Hilton Hotels and Waldorf Astoria, who have hotels on Saturn and are competing with each other, and it gets pretty nasty with murders and a bombing by Waldorf on the Hilton Hotel. And they just happen to have the president and the CEO of Hilton Hotel just happens to look like FDR.
Oh.
And I took that as a play on corporations waging war or being behind wars. And you could also take that from the Iron Man. If you want to take it one step further, it looks like because it's a takeoff on Pearl Harbor. If you want to take it one step further, you could argue that basically he's saying that America is a corporation.
Well, it is. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but I'm saying, was the writer saying that? I'm not sure. You know, I mean, that's a stretch to me for 1975 to think that. I don't know how people could know this stuff before the internet, obviously, but obviously people did. But in my mind, I could never know this without the internet. So I'm not sure how far the writer was going with that. But he was definitely, I got to think he was plugged into something. I can't at least take it as corporations being behind wars.
I just want to let people know this is one, what Herb's referring to is an article, I call them articles, but they're strips. This one is on the internet, and you can see it there. It's not one of the ones that I PDF'd for this particular show, so it's not as close up and definitive as you will see in the other PDFs. But remember something too, Herb. I mean, one of the things that we've been doing with the Olympic files is going back into suppressed history and the stuff that people were writing, you know, even a century ago about what is happening today. Now, you know, okay, those individuals like Gus Myers and stuff might have been really plugged in, but I think it would not be a stretch to figure out in the wake of the Kennedy assassination, which I have to say, I mean, and with both brothers being killed, I mean, that's got to like shake somebody's, you know, nest a little bit. That these guys weren't given out a little, and of course we cannot ascribe that to them. That would not be fair without their input. But I don't think it would be such a stretch, like you said, that there is no internet. But as we find a lot of the, as Gordon and I find a lot of the suppressed books, I mean, they're out there. But, and I will say, yes, the internet has allowed us to draw them really quickly. Otherwise, we'd be kind of like stretching around in the dark, you know, relying on libraries and such. So, yes, I agree with you. The internet is probably partly to do with what we see. But when they were doing that at that time, I had a hard time believing that these guys who obviously are extremely intelligent and gifted kind of didn't understand that something was going bump in the night. And that's my take. Herb, what do you think? Because, I mean, you know, I don't really know.
Yeah, I mean, I would have to agree with that. I mean, there were definitely 1980 in the Warren magazines. There were overt 1984 references, without question, from different authors, especially in their sci-fi issue, which is the one we met. The Attack on the Hilton Hotel was from Creepy 73, which was their sci-fi issue. So, they definitely had a, well, I mean, like you say, science fiction is generally bleak.
Yeah.
And it's, there's no question that they were onto something. And like you say, without actually getting the writer's input, you don't necessarily want to ascribe too much. But when some are about the Exterminator series, which we showed the cover, was about population control and keeping exterminating the unfit, and they had one of the stories was the original Exterminator story was a guy named Peter Orwell who had a child when he was deemed unfit he was genetically unfit to have a child, and then him and his wife had a baby. He was, right after she had a baby, he was arrested, and he was given the choice of spending his life in prison or becoming an exterminator. So he opted for the exterminator, and the first act he had to do to prove his loyalty, now sometimes they don't always make perfect sense, but they put his brain in the exterminator's body, but his actions could also be overridden or complemented by a computer. Well, the man's name was Peter Orwell, the computer's name was George. So, there's no mistaking that.
Yeah, I don't think there's any getting around that. So do we have
his first act? The first thing he had to do to prove his loyalty was to kill his own daughter, who he shouldn't have had in the first place, according to the government. So yeah, they were conspiratorial and plugged in, and I think George Orwell's 1984 cast a huge shadow over a lot of these writers, especially if you're a sci-fi writer. You have to know George Orwell.
Well, yeah, we would think so, but that, sometimes we wonder if that's the case. I just want to let people know, if you want to get in on this and you have a question or a comment to make, you can do so in the time that we have left, and it's only about 18 minutes or so. The call-in number is 618-219-8824. Okay, so one more time, and that's it for the rest of the show. Your calls are welcome, but it's 618-219-8824. Yeah, Herb, we've talked about it. Huh?
I was going to say, before I forget to mention, when Warren finally did do a strictly sci-fi magazine, the name of it was 1984. They later changed it to 1994, but it was 1984. So there's no mistaking how much Orwell had an influence, and like you say, the sci-fi is generally a dark genre,
yes.
Futuristic, about just taking it a couple notches further, especially with the technology. But the eugenics played a part. There's definitely a plugged in. They definitely had some people that were plugged in, and actually one of the writers, I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name, but I always called it, his name was Doug. I always called it Minach. It's probably Monch or something like that.
Okay.
He was also a writer for Warren magazines. Well, I have an anthology book by him called The Big Book of Conspiracies, where he had different artists, but he was the sole writer, and that book was recommended by McGowan. And so it's even this one, it's a comic book, but it's out of print.
All right,
like all the good ones are.
Herb, we do have a caller, so caller, come on.
Hey, how you doing? It's Gino again. I just want to make a reference. You guys were talking about Spanish artists, but in the 80s, the big artist was, his name was Boris Vallejo, I think.
Yes. Yep.
And he had used, I think, the woman weightlifter Rachel McLeish. She was a bodybuilder, as a model in a lot of his artwork. And I think that he was probably the biggest influence back then, because I remember talking about, with friends of mine, Boris was the big guy, you know what I mean? People had, his posters, his artwork, pasted up in their apartments and stuff like that growing up. And I think that he was probably the biggest influence at the time. And that's just what I want to chip into.
Yeah, I have a book of some of his artwork I got from my wife when I think
Yes.
we were first dating. And it was Boris, and I don't know if you're aware, his wife, Julie, is also an artist.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
No, I didn't know that at all.
Her style is very similar. She learned from him. Her style is very similar to his.
Okay.
Boris Vallejo, he was a huge fantasy, painter. And of course, like I say, Frank Frazetta pretty much started the genre. But we have Boris Vallejo, a very big name, and I learned of him through my wife.
Yeah, well, I learned a thing through, it was the Conan, when the Conan movies were coming out, he was the guy that was doing the artwork for those Conan posters and stuff like that. Yeah. And he was the go-to guy.
Gino,
I just wanted to pitch in that.
Gino, hold on a second.
Yeah.
It's true. I've seen a lot of your photographs, and I think this all plays into what we're talking about, because you and I had always said, I think we would prefer working in black and white with shadow, dark, and light, and all that other stuff, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, you know what? I started working in black and white when I always think that the not the digital print, but the old school, print, photo print actually gave you more information than the black and white. But the black and white on the digital actually let me experiment more.
But Gino, I always work with Tri-X. I mean, remember, 99% of whatever I did was with 35 millimeter. I used Tri-X. And I mean, I think black and white is the best for emotion, and a lot of the things that we're talking about with regard to what Herb's speaking to with Creepy and Eerie and what Deborah del Prete was talking about, I don't think there's any more greater emotional conduit than black and white.
Absolutely,
right.
Without a doubt. The black and white definitely gives you interpretations, that are not available in the color print. The black and white is it actually, there's so much more information on the black and white cell, believe it or not, than there is in the color cell, than there is in the color print.
Now stay right there, because I want to ask this of Herb. I will tell you, and this is just on a cold reaction, when you sent me what you did, it is just myself to react more to the black and white than the color. The color kind of, I don't want to say repulse me, but it's almost like if you're looking to really drive home a message, to me, color kind of gets in the way sometimes of the storytelling. So I'm going to throw it to you, Herb. Not that you have to feel that way necessarily, but what is your take? Because as I said to Deborah, I'll take the charcoals.
Oh, I absolutely agree. And I know, my artist John Severin, he was actually colorblind, but he agrees. I don't think, and another point is that when usually, if you have a color story and say in a normal black and white, like a Creepy, every once in a while they would have their color stories. Usually, the colorist wasn't the artist. So it's a completely different interpretation now. It's not even, it's not even the artist doing his own colors. So now you've got another hand in it, which can completely change the whole feel of it. And they had one artist who was a real popular Warren artist. His name was Rich Corbin, and he had a different way of doing color that worked for him. But he colored his own stories, and that, I think it was more cohesive that way. But yeah, I think the color gets in the way generally, and I think a lot of artists, especially in the horror genre, which a guy like, you could see all the lines, the lines you see were hand drawn, and so it gives it a much more dramatic effect, I think, than color is just. To me, it just gets in the way, and like I say, it's not even the original artist doing those colors.
I would say that the black and white, to make a blanket statement, does a lot better job of creating the mood. As color does. Yeah, without a doubt. I really don't know how to describe it. When I look at a black and white photo that I take as opposed to a color photo that I take in the same situation, the black and white definitely impacts me more than the color photo does, without a doubt.
If I'm walking by a TV and there's a black and white movie on, I stop and I look. I have to look. It just catches my eye, and I think automatically it's going to be a good movie. Or it's going to be It's just more. It's more interesting to me.
if you want to look at a real good examples of that, you can go to the say for instance, you go to the old Sherlock Holmes movies, okay, with Basil Rathbone.
Yeah. Right.
Now, a lot of the back then they were using 3x4. They weren't using the letterbox format, okay. But what they were doing was they were using a 3x4 format, and they were filming it for 3x4, okay, in black and white. And you see how they use that as to opposed to how they used widescreen converted to pan and scan. You know what I mean? Are you following me here?
Yeah.
When the artist goes to, the director uses a widescreen format in black and white, and then it's converted on video to 4x3 pan and scan, there's a difference that just destroys the original intent of the director's view of the way he thought the film should be shot.
But, Gino, you're talking about letterbox as opposed to trying to put everything in a square thing that we see on TV, right?
Yeah. But it's also in black and white back then. So right. the black and white, like, especially, I use those Sherlock Holmes movies because I'm a big fan of those. I watch those all the time, and they use that 4x3 format, okay, in black and white. That is so, it's unbelievable. In other words, they kept the intent of the way they wanted to film the scene in 4x3 to that without losing anything.
No,
you know what I mean?
Agreed. In fact, with the new, I mean, I go back and forth with this with Eric the Blacksmith without getting too far away from where Herb is, with regard to the old Holmes and the new Holmes movies with Robert Downey Jr. But the thing is, the green screen allows you to do so much more than there ever was possible back in the old days. But I am not so sure, and I think you both will agree, that with all the other vistas and panoramas and the background stuff, it really, to me, detracts from the drama that was played, which I think is essential to what Herb is talking about with what was done with Eerie and Creepy, and that is you want to stay in the box with what everything's going on, whereas when you get onto the big screen, they took it away from what we saw with Rathbone and was it Nigel Bruce was his name? Was he? Yeah. You know what I mean? So I mean, right. Yeah, black and white made us focus on the storyline. It can be a little bit mitigated against with, this panoramas and stuff. We don't need it. And I think comics, Herb, would you agree that it kept us in the box, but we wanted to be in the box, and that was necessary? What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, yeah, I definitely agree. Black and white, blacks and whites, and sometimes a little tone is okay in a comic book, but black and whites and the lines, as Deborah talked about, comics and movies are related. So it only goes to, it only stands to reason that if a movie looks better in black and white, so do comics.
Agreed.
And like James said, you can set the mood better, and it just, and like I say, the little subtleties and an artist puts when he's working with ink. He's not working with color in a comic book when he's doing it. He's working with ink. So to me, the color is only just, it's not there to begin with. It's only getting in the way.
So, I mean, we all agree, I think, that whether it's in film or TV, that you can take away from the story by becoming too distractive with color, with panoramas, and all that. I mean, I never brusque from watching a black and white movie. When you sent the PDFs along that you did, I gravitated immediately to the black and whites, and I didn't even think about that until we were just talking about this. But I mean, we're going to have to wrap this up pretty soon. But I think Gino brings a good point in, and I have to admit, I saw a lot of his photography from Brooklyn, and you'd say, well, it's a city, who cares, it's all black and white anyway. No, it's not. And he had a depth of emotion in what he did. And I think that's also what you're bringing out, and I think Deborah was talking about also with the spirit. Like, okay, let's get on with the story, and let's stay within the story. We don't need all the bells and whistles and, great panoramas and stuff. That's for something else. But, again, that's only me, but I don't think what I'm saying, and you guys are going to tell me, that don't you resonate with that as well? It's like there's times when you want to be in a cave, and there's times when you don't. What about it, Herb?
Yeah, but I will say for certain comic books, the color did work for certain, I think the Marvel and the DC, the smaller ones.
Yes, that's true. Right. Okay.
But, you needed some color for that. But certain stories, certain the horror genre, or even the detective genre, like you think of the Mickey Spillane and all, those had to be black and white.
When you read Mickey Spillane or some of these Pulp Fiction novels, don't you think in black and white when you're reading it, as opposed to thinking in color? When they're describing a scene.
Yeah, I mean...
It comes more naturally to you?
You don't think of a detective novel in color.
No, you don't. No.
No, I don't. No, even the Basil Rathbone stories, I don't think of those in color. I think when I'm reading them, I'm thinking of those in black and white for some reason. I don't know why I do it, but it comes more naturally than the color does.
Well, let me ask you guys.
Can fan too.
All right, think about this because we have to wrap it up. And also, I'm going to leave the links up to some of the, to all the PDFs that I have put up. And I dared not say this on the air, but I mean, there might be copyright problems with this, so I'll keep it up just for so long. And then we're going to pull them down, even if this goes out, on the archives. But let me ask you this. I mean, now that we're here, and we'll end with this. I think about now. Tell me that Pulp Fiction wasn't something that Tarantino did because he really wasn't looking for anything cerebral. He was just dealing with Pulp Fiction. To me, that would have been just as fine in black and white, unless you really like the color of blood. So, although I agree with you, Herb, that with the Justice League and stuff, if the costumes they were everything. So, yet, what good are costumes if you're going to have them in black and white? Your point's well taken. But when you want to get down to the nitty-gritty in the stuff that was done, especially in Creepy and Eerie, you want it to be focused on, and I know that there were comic books that were done in Creepy and Eerie that were color, but I mean, I think black and white is where we all want to go, more or less, and like I said, bringing it back to my original question, do we need to see Pulp Fiction in color? Probably not, but what's your call?
Yeah, I'd agree. It was probably been better in black and white. Well, it was a good movie.
Pulp Fiction, you know what they did, I think, in Pulp Fiction? They used color for the scenes, but they used black and white for the dialogue, if you could grab that. Because that's what grabbed me, the dialogue. It wasn't the visuals.
In Pulp Fiction?
Yeah.
All right, yeah, because the dialogues took place usually...
I perceive the dialogue in the movies as black and white like I do all Tarantino movies. I think he's just a black and white guy, deep down, but he does use the color because, that's what it takes today, to make a good movie,
All right, well, yeah, good call, because a lot of that stuff took place inside buildings and such, and you don't need color if you're going to blow up 5 people. Yeah, I mean, shoot up people. I mean, it's true. I mean, what do you need? But the point's well taken. We're going to have to wrap it up. Herb, you got last call on this. Thanks for the call, and I have to admit, your points are valid because, like I said, I've seen your work, and I can understand why you would chime in on this because it's pretty much what we're all talking about.
Could I make a suggestion before Herb chimes in? If you could get Deborah and John Kenneth Muir on the same show,
yes,
that would be awesome. That would be a really great show, man. Because I remember you did a thing with John Kenneth Muir about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago. That was just a blowout show. It was really great.
I appreciate that.
I enjoyed it a lot.
All right, Gino, thanks for being with us. I appreciate it. I have to say...
Good night, buddy. Good night, Herb.
My shows with John Kenneth Muir are up for sale. Another shameless self-plug on thinkorbebeaten.com under, I don't know what it is, collections, I think it is. But I have to admit, that probably would be a good deal. Muir is an excellent guest, and we talked a lot about, in fact, One Step Beyond, all done in black and white, and as creepy as there ever was, without all the kind of gore and stuff, and that's what we were talking about Deborah with, about Hitchcock. You don't need to see all this kind of stuff. He could make you crap your pants just by the turning of a doorknob and not knowing who was on the other side. Anyway, we'll let it go at that. Herb, you got last shot? And I want to thank you so much for coming on and spending the time and being a companion to Deborah.
Yeah, one thing I want to mention is funny he brought that up because I was going to say the same thing because I thought that Deborah del Prete, Deborah del Prete. Deborah del Prete. Yeah. I thought of John Muir. I said, man, it just reminded me of having that type of guest. And also, just a quick note on the creepies and the EERIEs. If anyone's interested, of course we have the PDFs for a little while, but Dark Horse has been reprinting in their entirety all the creepies and EERIEs. So if anyone's interested, if you go to Amazon.com and you look up, they give you a little synopsis of the issues. So this is an ongoing thing with Dark Horse where they reprint old Warren magazines. They also do, we didn't get to mention, Vampirellas. And another great Warren series that was only 4 issues was called Blazing Combat, and that was considered kind of an anti-war magazine during the Vietnam War. And what had happened is one of the stories where a farmer in Vietnam just got killed. You know, he was featured throughout the storyline, what his thoughts were, and he got killed. And of course, the Army didn't want people thinking that innocent civilians go get killed during a war, and the Army bases wouldn't let anyone read. They wouldn't let anyone have Blazing Combat, and the distribution ended up killing the magazine after only 4 issues. Oh. But the artwork is phenomenal. Some of the best, probably even better than Creepy and Eerie. You had the best artists from EC and some artists that could have been with EC. And the artwork is just out of this world, and it's considered one of the best war magazines. And that would be a great companion to Creepy and Eerie. And plus, it's only 4 issues, so you could have the whole series with one book. And that's available. And Frank Frazetta did all the covers.
Are you saying then that show? Get me. Are you saying that comic got pulled because of its controversial? Topics?
Yeah, yep.
Holy
yeah,
man.
Definitely. And yeah, people just to distribute, like Warren said, the first issue did great, and then word of mouth, and yeah, it was definitely controversial, and that was written by the guy who I mentioned, Archie Goodwin, wrote like virtually every story, but that was taken from Harvey Kurtzman, who did some war magazines for EC, and one of Harvey Kurtzman's stories featured a bomber, the Air Force bombers, and how removed they were from the devastation that they were causing down below. And so Harvey Kurtzman sort of set the tone for EC war magazines with a more humanistic approach, rather than all the just shoot 'em up type war magazines that you see, like the Sergeant Fury.
Sergeant Rock.
He actually focused. Yeah. He actually focused on the people and the devastation the war brought, which, I don't even know if that's far enough for me to even consider anti-war, but it wasn't pro-war. It was definitely a more realistic portrayal, and that was Blazing Combat. And yeah, it was too controversial. It was way ahead of its time, and the artwork is just out of this world. And like I say, anybody that likes art like I do and comic book art should check out Blazing Combat.
So you're saying, Herb, you pinko faggot, that there is no freedom of expression in America, isn't that right?
No, I wouldn't.
Well, I will. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, listen,
obviously.
Thanks. Go ahead, Herb, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I obviously agree, and
yeah,
it's the Hegelian dialectic. It's only within a certain framework can you be controversial.
Herb, I want to thank you for doing 2 hours with us in Yeoman's Duty. That's excellent. I appreciate it. And maybe we might want to go for a third part with what you're talking about with the banned, somewhat anti-war comics. I want to thank Deborah del Prete as well. You don't know what a great thing that was to talk to her after all these years. I want to thank the callers also, honestly, Kira, Crazy Karen from Canada, Gino, Bonaducci. Excellent calls. Thank you very much for inputting because that was important. And I thank Jim, Big Jim, honestly, out in Illinois. Bro, nobody knows what you go through, and I appreciate it. It's been a hell of a summer for you. And I thank you very much for spending this time with us. Thank you and your family. And everybody have a good night, and we'll see you for a Christmas show. The last of this year I'll do. Until that time, good night.